Good evening, everyone, and welcome to another show. We've got a panel debate for you tonight. Should be very good fun. We're going to be covering a whole range of subjects: Freedom Day, lockdowns, critical race theory, gender ID, politics, and loads of other juicy stuff. And I've got an excellent three-person panel with me tonight, who I'm sure will give us a lively debate. So to start it off in the most non-PC way imaginable, let's go with ladies first. And Laura Berrill, who is a journalist and I would dare to say a freedom campaigner. Laura, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
And then we have Pete Durnell, formerly of UKIP and a candidate many times over for them, now a Midlands organiser for the Reform Party. Pete, welcome to the show, mate.
Thanks, Bill. Nice to be here.
And the final member of our group tonight is a gentleman called Keith Rowe, a former UKIP candidate for Police and Crime Commission like Pete was, also a long-standing Brexiteer, now a campaigner for the Conservatives in the Birmingham area. Keith, pleasure to have you with us tonight, mate.
Good evening, Bill. Good to be with you.
Right, well, there's three of us here who've known each other for some time, and one newcomer, Laura, and you're very, very welcome to us tonight. I'm sure you'll enjoy it once we get cracking. So, to do the honours properly, I'll set the first subject and I'll set the ball rolling with you, Laura.
Okay.
Freedom Day, lockdown policy, isolation. We've been told by the government that all things are going to be okay, and Boris has been making these statements, but then he looks like he's backtracking. What are your expectations for what this so-called Freedom Day will bring, and how do you feel that the government has handled the pandemic thus far?
My personal opinion and my personal way of looking at this is that, as far as I'm concerned, I've been doing what I've wanted to do for the last 18 months. I mean, when we were told just before Christmas we couldn't see our family, I saw my family. I don't wear masks. I haven't worn a mask for a very, very long time. I might have done it right at the beginning. As far as I'm concerned, it's full steam ahead. This is, I don't know, this has been going on way too long. Freedom Day should not be called Freedom Day. It should be called This is Normal Day.
Yeah. Well, Keith, you're the representative of the ruling party. You've got, at least there's Laura and certainly me, who've been taking not a blind but a notice of your party's dictates from day one here. Apparently, according to the Prime Minister, we're killing our grannies or some such word like that. Do you think that it's right that the Conservative government could dare call a day Freedom Day, when actually freedom is ours by birthright? And do you think that they're perhaps gone power mad, or are you going to defend them?
Well, I think whatever you call it, they're going to get criticised. I'm not really bothered about what you call it. I really am more bothered about what's actually happened and what's going to happen. And I think that anybody who took office in the circumstances that Boris Johnson took office, taking over from Theresa May, who had messed everything up royally, being left with the situation he was left in terms of having to sort out Brexit, and then us being hit by this pandemic, which, whether you believe it's the worst thing since the Black Death or not, has certainly affected a lot of people's lives across the world and certainly helped the deaths of lots of people. I think 4 million was the last figure I've heard. You can dispute the figures. I'm not bothered about that, but it's certainly been a very serious time for everybody, and I can't wait really to for things just to loosen back up. I haven't liked these restrictions at all. As you know, I'm very much on the libertarian side of things. I believe in individual freedom as much as possible, and as long as it doesn't hurt other people. Government, though, does have an obligation to protect its citizens, and I think that the government has been dealt a very difficult hand. Yes, they're not beyond criticism. You can criticize them all you like, but thankfully we in this country have been leading lights in developing a vaccine to get us out of this mess. We're one of the best in the world for getting this vaccine out there. If you don't want to take the vaccine, don't take the vaccine. I'm not in favor of forcing anybody into these things, but I think most people have realized that that's probably in their best interest to take it. They've taken it. We're hopefully in this situation where these restrictions, which I don't think Boris Johnson wanted to put on us, to come back to part of your question, I don't think he's gone power mad. I don't think it's in his interests to have done any more forcing us to do things we didn't want to do. I think he's had to do it, and I think he wants us to loosen up. He wants, after all, the essence of so much of politics that we've known over generations, we know the phrase, it's the economy, stupid. If he wants to get elected again next time, the economy has got to bounce back. He doesn't want us tied down. He doesn't want institutions closed. He wants people spending the dosh and getting growth back out there. So I don't agree with you that he's gone power mad. And certainly he could be criticised, and I think people are criticising him. But I
hadn't noticed, Keith. Are they criticising him? Are they?
I haven't seen you criticise him, of course, Bill.
No, of course not.
But the sooner we get, to my mind, the sooner we get back to some sort of normality. I've got two students in this household. They've had a year of sitting in a room doing lectures by laptop. I mean, the universities and the education side of things is another discussion. I'll happily put my 2 pence in on that.
We'll come back to you on that, Keith.
But they've had a torrid year, and I think the sooner we can get back to getting out there and having some parties and getting meals out and all the rest of it, getting out to the pub, which I've managed to do a few times, thank goodness, lately, but the first time for a long while. Let's loosen up a bit and get things back.
Fair enough, Keith. You haven't lost it at all. You've still got you're still very erudite. You can still make a very, very good case for anything. Pete,
Thank you.
Pete, here we go then. Keith's made the case, and it's quite clear. The likes of me, and I think from your Twitter feed, yourself and sorry, Laura, we've been really unfair on Boris. We've been really unfair. That poor libertarian-minded, freedom-loving, good chap that he is, actually, in a time like this, he's had to go down this route of withholding freedoms and liberties. It's for our own good. Don't you think we've been wrong, Pete? Don't you think you and I and Laura probably owe Keith and the Conservatives an apology?
No, not really. I think let's call Freedom Day Two-Tier Society Day, because that's what it actually is. Absolutely appalling. We're going to have a two-tier society where the unvaccinated have all kinds of restrictions, all kinds of things they can't do. Vaccinated, double vaxxed. Oh, you can do this. You can come back from some country and not isolate, or you can. We know that he's going to actually, he's encouraging shops, businesses, transport organisations of all kinds to say, actually, we still want to keep masks and we still want to keep social distancing. So it's not Freedom Day. What it is divisive day. It's two-tier society day, because we've now got in this country groups of people who hate people who wear masks, and other groups of people who hate the ones that don't. And that, hate's a strong word, but literally that's what we've developed in this country. Similarly, for lockdowns, we got people who think lockdowns are absolutely essential. We got Boris coming out and saying, "Oh, it wasn't the vaccines what did it; it was me. I saved the country." And then a bit later, he'll go back to vaccines. I think we can all agree that he had a huge problem in the first place. We all know that it was a never happened before event, and we all give him a bit of slack for that. But what we know is that he's made all sorts of mistakes along the line. £37 billion on test and trace system, which I think is the BMA, said it did nothing, or various people said it pretty much. To use Boris's phrase, was it spunked up the wall, was one of his phrases, I think. £37 billion. Then we got the ring of steel that went around the care homes. Does anyone think that was actually true? We know that they shipped out people from hospitals straight into care homes. We know that was a nonsense. So we all give him credit for the vaccines, but what we can say about vaccines is we are really ahead of the curve, in actually vaccinating our population. What we're behind the curve in releasing our restrictions. America did it weeks and weeks ago. We've got all kinds of evidence in Texas, Florida, released all their restrictions, and basically we didn't see huge infection rises. The infections carried in exactly the same direction. So Boris, I'm afraid, he's created a divisive society. He's created a two-tier society as of Monday, and I'm afraid I do not like the way he's handled it at all. Yes, we're ahead with the vaccines. We all give him that. Yes, he had originally a tough. He was going to make mistakes. Every country made mistakes, but in between those two times, he's made some serious cock-ups.
Okay, well, Laura, we're going to come back to you now, and bear in mind that people who are anti-vaxxers, they're conspiracy theorists, and they don't get allowed on YouTube. So we're not against vaccines on this program. By the way, anyone watching, we're not against vaccines. However, I certainly won't be having one. They can shove it where the sun don't shine. I think that what's being laid out there by Pete, where he's saying the one thing that we're ahead of the curve on is vaccine rollouts, is hardly surprising when we have an NHS as big as the Red Army, where it's the kind of thing the totalitarian state would be very good at doing, is rolling out lots and lots of jabs. And I put it to you, Laura, for your thoughts and comments, that this is leading to not just a two-tier society that Pete raised, but also vaccine passports, which are ID cards by another name and can take us to a very dark place. What are your thoughts?
Absolutely. I mean, I haven't had the vaccine. For the time being, I have no intention of having it. I am highly allergic to penicillin. I have had anaphylactic shock. Now, that stops you breathing. So you can see the connection. I think it is an absolute personal choice. I mean, people talk about the Nuremberg Code. It's there for a reason. It is there for a reason. I mean, people talk about it doesn't stop you catching it. It doesn't stop you passing it on. There have been many underreported stories about adverse reactions, and that's always going to happen in a vaccine that is literally still in trials for another 2 years. The other thing that I take exception to, I think you're right, Bill, the whole vaccine passport thing is coming in by stealth. It really is. What I take exception to is the fact it's your body, it's your choice, it's personal responsibility. I am responsible for my own behaviour. I don't want to have anaphylactic shock. I don't want to be told what goes in and out my body when we're literally still in a trial. Now, I get it if you're a lot older, you've got comorbidities, you're more vulnerable, all that kind of thing. I get it, have it. Just don't tell everybody else what to do.
Yeah. Well, Keith, I put it to you that whilst the vaccine rollout has been very efficient, but as I just discussed with Laura there, I think that that's probably not surprising with the size of the welfare state, with the size of the NHS, with the size of our public sector. Probably not that surprising. What I do think is surprising from a Conservative government, and I do bear in mind that knowing you well as I do, I know you are genuinely a man with a libertarian lead. This is inevitably leading to ID cards. The bits of paper that we wave around are going to be replaced by a digitalized credit card with lots of information that we swipe, and we're going to be tracked and traced in every part of our lives. And it's a massive intervention on our personal freedom, isn't it, Keith?
Can I just say before that, Bill, that we're going down the China system, aren't we? We're going to have ID cards. Everywhere you go, they're going to be scanned. That'll all be logged somewhere, and you're basically going to end up with the merit type system, where you're a citizen and, you've had your vax, so you get another couple of points, and then you're allowed to go and do this activity. That's where we're heading. And anybody who thinks that isn't true, I'm afraid needs to take a long, hard look. So sorry, I interrupted Keith.
Well, there you go, Keith. Pete's polled in as well there. So you need to take a long, hard look. What do you reckon?
Okay, well, there's two parts to this, really. In terms of this particular vaccine and this particular vaccine passport, if you like, I suspect that the only way that this is really going to work is when you're going abroad, because other countries will want to know whether you're vaccinated or not. I don't see it being a long-term thing. It's just my guessing that every time you go to a pub or a restaurant, you're going to have to prove you've been vaccinated. We have seen this a little bit with other diseases on a much lower scale, where people who have yellow fever vaccinations, for instance, have to have a specific vaccination card before they can go to various countries. And I don't think that's particularly being criticised. I don't think it's off the scale. I don't see it really being for a COVID vaccination certificate. I don't see that being a major issue, certainly in the long term, maybe for a little while until this all fades out, but I can't see it. But where I do see that there is a potential issue is the way that technology is encroaching more and more on our lives. The more you have to protect your own personal data, and the more institutions and government in particular are holding more and more detailed information on everybody, where they've gone, what calls they've made, what they've bought, all this sort of thing. I mean, your supermarket that you go to regularly has so much information on you, because they know what food you like, they know how often you go to the shops, they know what you don't buy, what you do buy. There's all this sort of information, and as 5G comes in, more and more data on all of us is going to be collected, and I think that that's a little bit inevitable, and I don't think it's peculiar to this country. It's going to happen all over the developed world, that data protection and how much data we give away and allow people to use on our behalf is going to be a huge issue.
So are you suggesting, Keith, that actually data protection and our privacy is just a little bit of a Canute moment where we can't stop the tide on this, and we're just going to have to accept the fact that big corporations and governments know everything about us, and it's just one of those things?
Well, that may well be the case. Whether we can stop it, I don't know. To put a case forward at the moment that we don't want, well, at the moment you have to sign every time you do something. Yes, I tick that box. I allow Sainsbury's to have my data before I can have a loyalty card, or there's all this sort of thing, everything you do. But the reality of it is that every time you visit a website, every time you buy something, you're ticking that box saying, I accept your terms and conditions. And in that, you're allowing them to use your data. And governments have got our data. They have to have our data. They've had it for generations, but they've now got it in a far more linked up, electronic, easily accessed way that was never available a generation or two ago. And that is progress. And that's led to a lot of benefits for us.
Progress.
Huge progress. But there's a danger as well. And, it's like with the access to the internet. There's some fantastic stuff on the internet, and there's some very dangerous stuff on the internet that you wouldn't want your kids to look at.
Well, and according to most of the social media companies, this show is very dangerous stuff on the internet that has to have a warning on it as sensitive content.
Is there a warning about the presenter?
Yeah, I think that goes without saying, mate. Pete,
I'm
just going to lead into you now, Pete, because Keith put such a strong set of stuff. I can see you champing at the bit. I just want to add to my part on it that there's also the track and trace that you fill in when you go places, which the number of places I've been where it's been Matt Hancock and his address has been Downing Street that I put down. But, it's inevitable. Keith's right, isn't he? It's inevitable. We're already part of this information revolution. We are digitalized. We've got no control. We might as well just make the best of the benefits.
I think there's a certain amount of truth in that, but we know you go on, yourself, you go and Google something, and then next thing you know, you're bombarded with adverts for where you can buy it and so on. So if you're going to use technology willingly, by choice, you're going to have to put up with that. But then there's the aspect of, which we sort of talked about, where 5G comes in, and every time you walk in a building, it scans your card. And I think what we need to do is separate vaccine passports from health certification when you go in a building or an event, whatever it happens to be, because I think it confuses people calling it vaccine passports. That's fair enough. You go to another country, that country can decide whether you come in or not, and you never get away from that. And that's right, it should be like that. But it's different to saying, okay, like yesterday we had the cricket at Edgbaston, you have to certify your health, prove that you've been vaccinated or that you've just had a test. That's different completely. And we've got Boris saying openly he wants nightclubs to use this technology. He wants that methodology, rather. It's not a question about, I want to go to South Africa and they say you've got to be jabbed before you go. That's totally different. Yeah. We are talking about access to not pubs and restaurants initially, granted, but nightclubs, large events of all different kinds. And Boris is saying, right, that's what we want. We want that to happen. You have to prove your health status in terms of COVID, maybe other things in future, maybe flu and colds, who knows where they'll take it. I know Keith's obviously saying, oh no, we'll never do that and it will soon die out. Well, that history says once you introduce these things, they're very hard to get rid of, and they tend to just keep snowballing. And Boris is making no bones about it. That's what he wants people to do.
So which way do you think he's going, Laura? Is Keith right that we've got a benevolent state which is going to use new technology as best it can to make sure that we're looked after and okay? Or is Pete right that we're heading down towards this dystopian vision of IDs and internal passports to get us into events and our health data?
The government was benevolent, Bill. Now,
well, you led us to believe they weren't naughty. Well, you've got to think they're benevolent, Keith. You support them, mate. Come on, make a fist of it. But to paraphrase it slightly,
put those words in his mouth slightly, to be fair.
Well, yeah, well, I'm helping him. I'm helping him. Do you think then that there's nothing to be concerned about and there are benefits outshining the negatives? I think that's a fair way of phrasing what you said, Keith. Or do you think that we're heading towards
nothing to worry about?
Less to worry about than I'm making out?
No, there are things to worry about. I just don't think that we can totally exclude ourselves from this future technological revolution that's coming, whether we like it or not. And we have to make the best of it. We have to do what we can.
It almost feels like you reversed a bit there, Keith. But I'm gonna go with you on it. But anyway, so I'll take your latest statement. So, Laura, which of these views, of the views you've been presented with, which way do you think? Are we heading towards Boris Johnson's control, like some kind of chairman of the Communist Party, or are we just overreacting?
To be perfectly honest, I think I don't trust Boris at all. I think he is going that way. There are many reasons why I think that have happened over the last 18 months. I do work in technology. 5G really isn't all it's cracked up to be. I mean, if we're going to go down that road, the sustainability is ridiculous. I mean, it's just not there. It's just not there. I don't trust him. I don't trust him at all. He's lied in the past many times. I believe in a true democracy, whereas people take responsibility for their own lives and do not have to be guided by a government to do anything that they are not comfortable with doing at the end of the day.
Yeah, and I think that's a very reasonable point. Now, I'm going to bounce back to you on this, Laura, before we come back and hit Keith with all of our points again. That in France at the moment, I mean, you won't see it on the mainstream media, or not to a great degree, but there's huge protests going on against that strange power mad dwarf, their president, who is completely out of control, who's been saying people can't go into shops if they're not being double jabbed and all sorts of things. And the French, and it's very rare for me to say something nice about the French, but the French are actually standing up and chanting liberté, liberté, which always brings a bit of a tear to the eye. Do you think that they've got it right? And do you think that eventually the British people will see that there is only one way to do this, which is to get out the streets and protest?
Yes. I mean, part of my degree was French. I've spent a lot of time in France. There's one thing the French do very well, which is protest. And I have been on 2 big marches in London in recent months that, again, were overlooked by the mainstream media in this country, as the French ones are. And I tell you what, we need to take the lead from the French, because the French, they don't muck about. They don't muck about. And the thing is, Macron's got an election coming up. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I don't really know what the strength of their opposition is at the moment. Ours is non-existent, so we're in a completely different ball game. But absolutely, I'm with the French.
Well, the French do have an opposition which is quite strong, and not everyone's to everyone's taste. But I did get sit quite close at one point to the European Parliament called Madame Le Pen, and believe you me, I wouldn't like to be in Macron's shoes when he has to come face to face with her. She's not someone you want to mess with.
I think there's a new guy, Bill. Isn't there a new kid on the block? Because both Macron and Le Pen didn't do very well in the last elections, they have.
Well, whoever it is,
a new whiz kid, new Tony Blair type appearance.
Oh no. Don't say that. You put me off him already.
I wasn't trying to prove you to like him. But...
I want to put it to you, this argument that we've got to follow the lead of the French. The only way that we can make any change, because the parliamentary democracy isn't working. We've got lockdown party blue, lockdown party red, monster raving party blue orange, who seem to not have a clue what they're on about, and communist party green. So the only way that freedom-loving people can get anywhere is by peaceful, calm, sensible protest on the streets. What do you think?
Are you asking me, sorry, Bill?
Yes, Pete, yeah.
Definitely. I think one of the things that really concerns me with the next Monday's new two-tier society day is we're moving away, which we've had ridiculous, trying to legislate on every aspect of your life, from who you sleep with, what member of family you can see, where you can see them. We're moving away from that, and now it seems to be that the new thing is, well, it's all going to be down to you, but we're telling you really what you should do. And the way they're going to enforce is basically through fear. And the one thing that's really bothered me over the last 18 months is this campaign of fear. I walk in the park every morning and afternoon, and to be honest with you, it really, really upsets me. I see people sitting on a bench wearing a face mask completely on their own, 50 meters from anywhere else. So we're moving away from this fining people, which never really works, but anyway, supposedly legislating, to this idea that, well, it's going to be down to you, but by the way, this is what you should do. You should wear your mask here, you should social distance there, etc., etc. And they're going to, you can already see it in the adverts that are starting to come out, well, public information campaigns. It's another load of fear. And what it's doing to children, what it's doing to people of all ages, that 16 months or whatever it is now, fear, it's really damaging, not just their mental health, because mental health is always affects physical health. And I'm really, really concerned about that road that they're going down. Okay, we're not going to make it a law anymore, but this is what you should do. And here's all the fear to tell you who you're going to damage, who's going to, etc., etc., if you don't do it. And the peer pressure and the setting these two groups against each other. And that's what's, to be honest, concerning me most. But to answer your question, yeah, basically, I do think we've got no political party. Obviously, my party, Reform UK, is really strongly standing up for the kind of things that I've been talking about, but we're still at 3% in the polls or something like that. I do think that will pick up. But I'm concerned, bluntly, that this fear bombardment will keep people kind of weighed down, keep people off the streets, and basically it's going to be a hard road fighting it.
Well, here you are, Keith. Here's the thing, you see. Your party in government has waged psychological war on the British people, has terrified people, has made them so terrified that they wear a mask when they're sat on their own in the car or when they're walking in the park. The equivalent of if there'd been an anti-AIDS campaign, they'd be walking down the street wearing a condom just in case. So do you think that perhaps the government communications strategy has been somewhat over the top?
Well, let me just say one thing, Bill, before I answer that, is that I'm absolutely amazed that I'm hearing Bill Etheridge saying that this country should take a lead from France into how to campaign. And that's really tickled me. And you've done an about turn there of monumental proportions. We live in
strange times, mate.
We do. The truth of the matter is that thankfully we live in a country whereby if you really want to protest and you seriously don't like what the government is doing and you think they've made such huge mistakes, then you have alternatives to vote for, whether it's Reform or Labour or Liberal Democrat. Anybody can stand, any party can stand. Listen, the Greens can stand. And
you can know better than most, Keith, that it's very difficult for them to get a headway in the first past the post system.
Listen, you and I have both experienced that, and we know how difficult it is, and we know how panicked Mr. Cameron was at the time, which is why the referendum came. We've been through all of that because we know that you have to get to a certain point, in a certain percentage point. I think it's about 25% overall, where you start breaking through in the first past the post system, and otherwise you can get 4 million votes and 1 MP. We know that, and it's a very we can talk about the voting system, which certainly has flaws in it, and I think we probably would all agree that it would be a good idea to make some changes to the voting system.
But as where we are, though, Keith, in the world we live in, and I think you're pushing us an open door here to a massive electoral reform, obviously. But the world that we live in, there is no parliamentary opposition to the Conservative government on this issue. So what can people do? I mean, bear in mind that the Conservative government has also been working very hard to make gatherings of more than a few people illegal. What are you supposed to do?
Well, you said that they'd wage psychological warfare, and I think that's
fair comment.
No, I think it's slightly over the top comment. You listen. You can make a case for it.
Don't give Granny, you'll kill her.
But psychological warfare, I wouldn't describe it as. They've tried to make the case to hold back a virus, and I've seen people driving in a car with the windows closed by themselves in the car with a mask on, and you think, you're bonkers. You either like wearing these things, or
you've been frightened into
they're a fashion accessory, or totally bonkers, over the top. It's not going to protect you from anything or anybody else.
Keith, why do you think they're doing that, Keith?
Well, you're probably speaking to the wrong person, because I can't wear these blessed things. I've had issues with them, and I've been exempted from wearing them, and I don't like them. But there are some people who wear them. But there are some people who wear them who I think perhaps aren't so bothered by wearing them, in the same way as some people, don't like wearing other items of clothing. They just treat it as another item of clothing, and it doesn't bother them. And for those people, they probably think to take it on, to take it off, it's a bit of a faff, I'll leave it on. I can't see any other reason for it either, unless you've got one of these printed ones with a particular national flag or a football team on it or something like that, and you want to just walk around like wearing a T-shirt saying, "Hey, I'm a Wolves fan."
Okay, let's move away from the mask a second then, because I want to pin you a little bit more on this before we come to Laura. What I can see is really warming up, and I know she's going to give you a good blast in a minute. But before I'm enjoying this, Keith. You're performing masterfully, mate. It is fair play to you. I'm genuinely, as you know, I admire you anyway. I think you're doing a great job here. But listen, how can it be that we've got a situation where millions of people are now suffering with their mental health, where we have got a nation on antidepressants, basically, where we've got people,
children on antidepressants,
children going through massive mental health issues. And you objected to my phrasing, saying it was over the top, of psychological war on the people, and yet the evidence is quite clear that this is almost a psyops campaign, because people weren't taking things seriously enough in the government's eyes, because they were perhaps looking at the figures that were showing over a 99.9% recovery rate from this and thinking perhaps it wasn't that big a deal to destroy all of our economy and freedoms for. Since then, this has happened, and now you've got opinion polls, which we all know opinion polls are a bit dodgy, but they're saying the majority of people want to keep restrictions forever and masks forever. Well, come on, Keith. You're an intelligent man. You're a businessman. You've dealt with people most of your life. Really, is that human nature, or are they being absolutely affected by the propaganda?
Certainly, I think to some extent people are being affected by the propaganda. The propaganda affects different people in different ways. I think there is a huge mental health problem coming down the line. I think government recognises that. I think a lot of people recognise that. Elderly people have been locked away from their families. Young people have been locked away from their families. There is a huge thing coming. There is also a huge health problem coming because of the fact that COVID has taken over the health service to such an extent that people who are suffering from other diseases have been left in the sidelines, and those issues are going to come back and haunt the country for a while. So I don't think there's anything good to say about COVID. I understand why the government was to some extent panicked into having to really do major changes to society to try and stop the disease. I think it perhaps could have been worse, the disease, than it was, and some of that might have been down to what the government did. But whether it's all good, I think a lot of what's come out of this pandemic is extremely bad. And I see elderly people who, you just look at those pictures of elderly people who were relatively healthy 80-year-olds in an old age home, but they've had no social contact for 6 months, 8 months, and they go right downhill. And I think that that's the same for all of us in many ways, except for the fact that you can see it more obviously in them. And I don't think this pandemic has been good for the country at all, but that doesn't mean that the government was wrong to tackle the pandemic, because it could have been worse.
Laura, the government wasn't wrong to tackle the pandemic as it has, because it could have been worse. One of the things that we left out, I think, in this conversation was that some middle class people have been on furlough, have been quite comfortable, and the working class have been absolutely smashed again, like every time something happens. But we had all that together, as we discussed, mental health, physical health, working class people struggling financially.
Oh, that's true, Bill. Sorry, I just got to cut in there, because a lot of people who you would class as working class, who are working in, say, the big factories and the big organizations, they've still been at work, they've still been earning the money, they've still had some social contact, they've still got out there. It hasn't necessarily been quite as class restricted as you're making out. A lot of middle class people who
Bill, can I just say very quickly?
Let me bring to order. I'm going to get my gavel, because Pete, I'm going to come to you. But Laura's a new guest, and she hasn't had as much of a say as everyone else. So, Laura,
I'll shut up.
All of that. Your response, please hit the floor running with it, and we're all ears.
Well, there's two sides. I've got two answers to that. My eldest son is autistic. He has been devastated by this, and that is no understatement. He has been absolutely devastated. He has regressed. He's had no access to activities or engagement. He's gone backwards. The amount of work I've had to do to make sure he gets even the slightest bit of interest from mental health professionals, it's been diabolical. It really, really has, believe me. The other thing I wanted to say is people like, the government advisors, SAGE, the politicians, the MPs, they haven't lost a day's work. They haven't lost a day's money. They haven't had to go anywhere. They haven't had to commute. They've saved money. And the region that I live in, and I'm leaving quite soon because it's ridiculously expensive, people around here have been working from home instead of commuting into central London, and the amount of massive extensions to their own homes that are being built right now has been a direct result of them saving a hell of a lot of money by getting up and walking downstairs and doing the job from home.
Yeah, and Pete, I know you don't want to get in, and I just want to throw in there as well, the people working in shops, catering industry, pubs, etc., who've lost their jobs as well through all this. But Pete, come on, fire away, mate. I know you've got a lot to come back to Keith on.
Yeah, I mean, the World Health Organization, which is not known for its sort of libertarian views, basically says lockdowns, only use them when your health system is on the point of collapse. And the reason is they make the poor poorer. It's an absolutely established fact. The rich get richer and the poor get poorer. That's what lockdown. We can see it all over the place. Amazon, Google, as you say, hospitality industry is shut. Loads of people really on low incomes, etc., lose all their jobs. So, I mean, it's just like an unequivocal fact that that's what lockdowns do. So you're going to have to argue, well, okay, that's counteracted by all these lives they save. Well, the evidence doesn't really support that, but at the end of the day, you can't get away from this single fact that that's what lockdowns do. It makes poor people poorer and rich people richer.
On that note, I'm going to bounce some new subjects in here now because we've spent 40 minutes on that one, but a lot of things are linked and connected. So let's go straight into, we've just had the European Football Championship, and aside from some people saying Gareth Southgate's team did well to beat a load of average teams to lose to the first decent side they played in the final, one of the main talking points was the fact that the players insisted on going down on one knee at the start of every game because they felt that was an appropriate way to complain about racism, and they brought to the very forefront, perhaps accidentally, but some of the discussion that goes on about critical race theory at the moment, where if you're of a certain race, you are oppressed by nature, and of another race, you are naturally a bad guy, or to paraphrase. Laura, I don't know if you're into your football, but what's your view on taking the knee? You're just like someone on GB News did recently. Would you be taking the knee?
Absolutely not. As you know, Bill, I had a professional footballer in the family in the same area that you live in, although in an opposing kind of rival derby.
We don't mention the Villa.
Yeah. I don't think there's room for politics in sport. That's it. And it is politics in sport, and there's no place for it. Sport is sport. It should be an equal playing field for everybody, regardless of the colour of your skin. Getting dragged into this racism thing and the Marxist associations, it's all, a little bit dodgy, but no, politics does not belong in sport.
Okay, Pete, I think I might get a different answer to this, but when you play cricket on the weekend, a demon medium-paced bowler, as I've witnessed, I bet you, before every game, feel that it's an appropriate gesture to go on one knee to symbolise to all those around you that you are an anti-racist.
Well, it is gesturing, isn't it? That's the end of the day. I think the answer to this is really, really simple. I don't have a problem with people making a gesture to say we stand against racism at the start of a football game or whatever game it is, but don't use Black Lives Matter as kind of like, or the Colin Copernicus. Don't use that particular because it is associated with subservience back through the ages. It's got all sorts of connotations. Don't use the bend in the knee. They must be able to just think of something else that would do just as good a job. Yeah, it shows we're all united against racism, and rightly so. But don't use that particular method. I just think it's so simple to solve it, but they won't. It's, it's got nothing to do with Black Lives Matter. It's got nothing to do with this. Well, fine. A lot of people, unfortunately, think it does, and they would all get behind a different way of doing it. Link hands, link arms, whatever it is. Do you know what I mean?
Think whatever gets people going. But Keith, since Southgate's bunch of penalty fluffers did quite so well and became popular, and Tyrone Mings had a go at Priti Patel, it looks like the government's backtracking a bit, because before they were, no, we think it's okay for people. Well, we shouldn't condemn people to boo the taking of the knee and all the rest of it. And they seemed to be giving the vibe that they didn't quite agree with it. It appears the mood music has now changed to a degree. Do you think that actually the England team, by their heroic exploits, have somehow managed to make this knee-taking race situation somehow a more acceptable thing we should all be considering, like some Tory MPs are, that perhaps it's not such a bad thing to be on your knee after all?
Well, they're certainly trying to make us feel as though it's acceptable, aren't they? And that certainly seems to be the way it's going. I just want to correct you before I fully answer, though, just on one thing, because I'm not a football expert and I never pretend to be. But my taking of the situation was that the England team didn't actually lose out to Italy. They just lost. They drew the game and then lost out on penalties at the end. So
you find the game decided on penalties, Keith?
Sorry? The game was decided on penalties. It's decided on penalties, but they didn't lose.
We lost, mate. You could argue black was white, mate, but at the end of the day, we lost that game.
We lost the tournament, and that was a great shame. But they did a good job. You can't win every tournament, as England team know only too well.
Indeed, any of them.
Yeah, but when it comes to taking the knee, as they call it, why it's taking the knee, I don't know. take my backside when I sit down on it. I really don't know. What we're doing here is we're importing American race relations into this country, and that is incredibly dangerous. The history of racism against black people in America is very, very different to any racist history in this country, and we're in danger here in a lot of people's minds of mixing the two together. And this going down on one knee is a Black Lives Matter salute. Black Lives Matter are in favor of defunding the police. They're a hard left Marxist organization who, incidentally, and this is something that is not pointed out enough by anybody in the mainstream media at all, they are in fact racist themselves. They have a highly anti-Semitic agenda themselves. They are not, if I'm allowed to use the phrase, whiter than white at all. They are in fact racist. Now, to my mind, if you want to fight against racism, as I do, and I think most other good people in this country wish to do, then you can't choose the race is that you like and that you don't like. The whole point is you want all races to be treated to be treated equally, regardless of whatever your race, creed, color, religion, whatever you want to call it is. When you start picking and choosing and saying we are against racism when it comes to one section of the community, but we're not so bothered about racism when it comes to another group within the community, that is incredibly dangerous. Black Lives Matter are not an organization that I think most people, if they really looked into it, would want to be associated with. So I'm 100% in favor of fighting racism in all of its forms, whether that's any form of prejudice because of the color of their skin or because of their religious beliefs or because of what part of the world they're from. But we have to do this in a different way. And this taking the knee, as they call it, which is allied to Black Lives Matter, which is a political movement raking in millions and millions of dollars for their horrendous agenda, we should distance ourselves from as far as possible. Is that clear?
Well, amen to that, Keith. I think we'll possibly all agree with you there. But let's set the ball rolling with Pete on this one, because I don't think you've been the first one in bat. You've not opened the batting so far this show, Pete. So another American.
Are we doing cancel culture next?
Oh well, kind of. We're doing gender identity politics.
Oh no!
Another American thing that's come in. You've got to call people by the right name. They're they or them or he or her, whatever. You've got to be very careful if you say ladies and gentlemen or folks. I think in some cases you're going to cause enormous offence. Now, your view on where we're going with this, is it something that it's right, it's only courteous and sensitive to bear in mind what people want to identify as, or is it just a complete self-indulgent load of nonsense and we just carry on as we always have?
My view on this is, well, it's an incredibly difficult subject for a start, but my view on it is ultimately you can end up with a conflict because basically with the kind of different, well, let's say where men decide to identify as women and then they want to use the women's toilets and go to female jails, etc. You're going to end up with a situation where a lot of women aren't going to be very happy with that because they don't want that situation. So you're always going to have a conflict. And I think my view is that you're never going to resolve that any other way than it's the will of the many outweighs the will of the few. Where it doesn't affect other people, where, if you can call yourself whatever you want, penguin, I don't care. It's not affecting anybody else. Do you know what I mean? If you want to identify as Piers Morgan does as a penguin occasionally, that's fine. But where you identify something and then say, right, now I want this and now I want that, and that actually really impacts on other people's lives, like women who actually don't want men, used to be men and now women in their toilets, etc. Then my opinion is, I'm afraid, then you actually have to go with the majority because there is always that conflict. Someone's going to lose out. You can't all have, if they can't go to the toilets and basically women will be happy with it. So you're going to have to essentially go with the will of the many outweighs the will of the few, if you know what I mean. But where it doesn't, where that's not the case, you can go off and just, by all means, identify as whatever you want. I don't mind. It's fine. But when it actually comes down to that, where it's impacting other people, you have to make a decision. It's not easy, but you've got to do it.
Laura, add to that men identifying as women and then going and competing in the Olympics and various other sports, and strangely enough, winning, which is almost hard to believe. I wonder if you've got a view on this.
I've got a very strong view on this. I have been involved with a sex-based rights organisation for quite a long time. Well, quite a long time, 18 months, just before this all kicked off. And there was a very high-profile court case that I publicised as well for my client. And basically, it's a matter of there are two sexes. There's a man, there's a woman, there's male, there's female. Now, there is such a thing as dysmorphia. And I actually have a friend for quite a long time who 30 years ago transitioned from being a man into a woman. The whole works, the whole, hormones, the whole lot. The fact, what has happened to that now, especially in places like Europe and in Ireland specifically, is that a biological man is now allowed to self-identify as a woman. And when that happens, they have access to women's only spaces. And that's what causes the problem. It causes huge, huge problems. Men are committing crimes and being told that they're women. So excuse the crime figures. What I'm saying is mammals like us cannot change sex. Once you go through puberty, there's male, there's female. If you conflate that, there's a lot of problems for women's rights.
Keith, mammals can't change sex. All this conflating of things is causing problems for women's rights. What do you reckon?
Okay.
Well, I think there's male and female before you reach puberty, actually, and I think that the differences are there. And I think people can identify and live their lives however they wish. If I wish to change my name to a female name and put a dress on, it's not something I'm going to do, but I'm allowed to do it, and that's fine. But whether that affects my legal status and whether that means I can then go and join a woman's sports team or go into the latest cloakrooms or whatever it may be, I think that this is fundamentally wrong. It's got to be wrong. And I suppose the real issue then comes when people go down that medical route of actually, as they call it, transitioning and going through surgical procedures to try and change them, as to whether that does actually change them or not. But I don't think that a lot of this argument really is around those people who really go the whole hog of having themselves surgically altered and hormonally changed. I think the problem is, as I see it, those who just self-identify. And that's where the problem is, because if you self-identify as something that you're self-evidently not, you're then completely changing the balance of society without any basis for it. And when you see somebody who was born a man and competed in weightlifting as a man, then saying he's now female, and going and competing in a female weightlifting tournament, and you see the difference between these naturally female competitors and this very big burly male figure that identifies as female. It's not fair on anybody. It's not fair on these Olympic athletes who have trained for years and built themselves into whatever skill for whatever sport, to be for this to happen in that way. And it's going to make a whole nonsense of sport generally if that's allowed. I'm sure sport isn't the only example we could find, but the Olympics are the next big thing that's going to come along, and the Commonwealth Games here, and these sporting achievements, it's going to make an absolute nonsense if games that require physical strength, and weightlifting is the most obvious of those, but perhaps boxing, for instance, is the next one. And you think to yourself, it's going to make a whole nonsense of these sports if big burly blokes can suddenly self-identify and go and compete in those sports. Got to be wrong.
Well, we're going to move on to one last subject before we have to close, and I want to move on to it quickly because I'm left with this image of Keith Rowe wearing a dress, and I'm not sure whether or not you've got
only an image in your mind.
Yeah, I need to get rid of it, Keith, because I'm not sure that you got the legs for it from recollection. So I think we'll scan past that image, and we'll move on to, as Pete mentioned, cancel culture, which is probably particularly relevant as some of the things we've said tonight we might well get cancelled for. So, Pete, lots of examples really of cancel culture from the likes of Jim Davison not being able to get a gig to Andrew Lawrence being in trouble recently, and many others. What do you think? Where do you think we're going with this, and how can we combat it?
Where are we going? I mean, it just seems to be getting worse and worse, more ridiculous. I know the Andrew Lawrence has been cancelled due to the fact that he made some, I mean, to me, unfunny, stupid comments. You could argue they're racist, obviously, because he said something like black men can't take penalties because the 3 who missed the penalties were not white. He also said something about, well, maybe Marcus Rashford should spend more time on perfecting his game instead of going off and doing political campaigns about hungry children. And so it's just, it was tasteless. It wasn't particularly funny, but to me, you've got to ask yourself a question: should that be the end of his career? And effectively, that potentially is what's going to happen. He's been basically wiped out across the country, had a whole load of shows booked, and now they're pretty much all just said, sorry, no more. And that is the end of his career. It's his wife who's going to be affected. It's his children. For a tasteless remark, or 2 remarks, or whatever it was. And, if they were supposed to be jokes, okay, they weren't funny. He shouldn't probably have said them. But at the end of the day, a lot of times jokes are stupid. They're not really, I don't believe for a second he thinks that black men can't take penalties.
Well,
because we all know it's ridiculous. But then that's
absolutely
what humour is, isn't it? Isn't humour based on the ridiculous? But because it's involving a colour or a race, then suddenly he's got to lose his career. And I don't really see how you can actually justify that as a sensible way to go.
No, and obviously those things are tempted to jokes, but they're not funny, and it can cause offence. So obviously, not the kind of thing that we would.
But then humour's always caused offence, but because it's involving race and stuff, you've got to lose your house and your career.
Yeah, which is interesting development. We would not obviously condone that on this channel.
No, of course not. But absolutely, what I'm saying is, by all means, slate him, say it's stupid, which it was. By all means, criticise him, belittle him, hang him up as a person who's just been really stupid, but really lose his whole career over it, and his wife and his children suffer.
Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, I just occasionally have to say these things in case when our Big Brother is often watching.
But no one came to that. You remember the film White Men Can't Jump? That's still doing the rounds. No one seems to. It's equally ridiculous to say white men can't jump as to say black men can't take.
I've taken great offence at that as well, because I can jump. Right, Keith, we're going to get to you because we're going to finish the show as we started with Laura. So, Keith, cancel culture. What can we do about it? Do you think it's a good thing? Do you think that sometimes people say things that they deserve cancelling for, or should the markets decide?
Yeah, well, on the whole, I'm a free speech person, and I think that if a comedian makes unfunny jokes or tasteless jokes or purely insulting so-called jokes, that the audience will recognize that and they'll lose their audience, and that'll finish their career. And I think I'm not in favor of people being cancelled by the platforms that they're on. I think if somebody is a comedian or a musician who's singing about something, whatever it may be, if the music's no good, people won't buy the records. Or is that old-fashioned now? But you know what I mean. And that's the way I feel. And I think that free speech cuts through everything. And if somebody's got a poor message, then that will be found out, and that's the way to do it, rather than cancelling people. I find this overwokedom, and oh, you can't use those words, and you can't say it like that, and you can't make a joke about this. My goodness, over I don't know how many generations people have made jokes over different groups of people. Some of the jokes have been funny and stood the test of time, and a lot of them haven't. And I think that's just human nature. And if you're not allowed to do that, that's a sad indictment of modern society.
Okay, thank you, Keith. Now, as we're running out of time, Laura, it's going to come to you because you started, so you shall finish on your first appearance with us. So, Laura, cancel culture. Do you think there's some merit to it, or as Keith said, if people don't like the music, they won't buy the record?
Absolutely no justification for it whatsoever. Everybody's entitled to their own opinion. Everyone can take offence by anything. That's not the point. The point is a healthy debate. If you can't debate anything, then free speech is dead.
Well, on that note, I think we've debated a lot and proved that at least on this particular platform, free speech is alive and well tonight. So I want to thank Laura, Keith and Pete. Each of them, I'll make sure that this gets out to their social media platforms. So if anything's been raised tonight you want to raise with them, I'm sure you can contact them directly and they'll have further discussions with you. But it's been a cracking hour's conversation. I want to thank each of you for coming on. Keith, particularly for fighting a lonely corner at times, mate. You're very, as normal, very bold and courageous of you, mate. And one of the two guests as well. Thank you for being so straight.
With his library, though. Look at the books he's got.
I know, yeah. He wins on books alone, doesn't he? The rest of us have got no chance. No chance at all. So on that note, I'd like to say thank you, everyone. If you've enjoyed this, share it around every platform you can. If you really enjoyed it, follow us on YouTube, because the more people watching, the more we can do shows like this. And I want to thank everyone for watching and wish you a good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.